Well, good afternoon. Again, to my Crim 2 students, I forgot to mention a few issues as it pertains to the bail reform discussion that we had. And just very quickly, I just wanted to say a few things we perhaps don't consider sometimes is that when we talk about the issue of public safety pertaining to bail reform, is it better for us to have a cash bail system when we consider that those who are wealthy enough are going to be able to bail out? In other words, is it better for public safety? So if I'm a rich guy and I am guilty of murder and my bail is set, we'll just say at $1 million. Well, while $1 million may be a substantial amount of bail, if I can afford it and I'm, really a threat in terms of public safety because I've murdered someone, is public safety enhanced from the cash bail system? While it ensures that somebody secures a bond while I'm being released, at the same time, for instance, if we took, for instance, like the Vegas shooter, if he was allowed to post bail after shooting all of those people from that hotel window, is public safety enhanced? I mean, he was just guilty of or accused of having shot 60 something people. And if he could afford to post bail, as any wealthy person probably would be able to afford to post bail, is public safety truly enhanced in that system? And so in that regard, if you agree that public safety is not enhanced, that our communities are not made safer from the idea that somebody can post bail and simply based on their affordability of bail for that particular individual, that they could potentially come back out in society and threaten those individuals who have perhaps contributed to their arrest, we'd have to at least assume in some situations that public safety is not enhanced and that particular system needs some degree of reform. Now, one of the other criticisms that was raised was the issue of discretion, that the cash bail system has been very much discriminant against certain groups of people, primarily minorities as well as the poor, and that in this new system that is likely to come about, that there's a high degree of potential for bias. In other words, someone might choose to discriminate based on someone's race or gender or sexual preference, etc. And I think those are very real concerns, but I think we also have to consider that at some point in the criminal justice system, whether that's at the decision to post bail or whether that's at sentencing or whatever the case may be, at numerous points throughout the process of what we refer to as due process, processing the criminal, that several opportunities for bias exist. And this is one of the reasons why we tend to have objective, what are referred to as objective methods of risk assessment, where you perhaps fill out a form that includes questions about your prior criminality, about the seriousness of the crime, the severity of the crime, etc. But all of these methods of trying to determine risk have their limitations. For instance, the risk assessment methods in Mississippi generally resulted in someone being considered to be dangerous or violent in almost every case, which led to some reforms of those risk assessment instruments or surveys. So again, no method we put in place is going to be foolproof, and at some point, someone with some expertise and logical capacity for decision making is going to have to determine whether or not an individual is going to be released. And whomever that is, whether it's a group of congressmen in Washington, D.C., or whether it's a judge sitting on the bench in Fresno County, that individual is going to possess a lot of power in determining whether or not somebody can be free. And at the same time, the possibility for discrimination does exist. Now, one of the things that Chapter 1 discusses very extensively is this idea that at numerous points of due process, there's more than one entity making the decision as to whether or not there was substantial probable cause to hold someone pending trial. And so this system of checks and balances, if you will, of numerous entities other than the police, again, the courts have to step in and make a determination of guilt, or whether or not there's enough evidence to suggest guilt. That system is supposed to, although it does not always, it is supposed to ensure some degree of fairness. And so I can't argue that the system does not have the potential for a high degree of bias. But what we have to keep in mind is that anytime that you're dealing with the issue of administering justice, that is a lot of power in the hands of that individual, whether it's the police officer on the street making the arrest, whether it's the judge determining guilt or deciding whether or not to allow the individual to post bail, or whether it's some parole board making a decision of whether or not somebody should be released from incarceration. Those individuals have a lot of power in their hands, and so it's important that we select the right people, people that are non-biased, hopefully, that are fair in their decision making and not prejudiced. And in doing so, obviously, we'll create a better system. But just wanted to speak to the issue of discretion, and that you can't eliminate discretion in the justice system the way it is today. And based on that discretion, those individuals are going to have the potential for discrimination. That is just a fact. And so we'll just have to do our best to select individuals that are going to do their job honestly and fairly in doing so. Again, just a few points to update from the previous video. Thanks.